evening, Philippines, and good day, world. It's Friday, November 10, 2023. And once again, you're watching Newsline World. I'm Mayk Oliveira.
And I'm Frederico Velloso. We're here to bring you the top stories we've gathered from all over the globe.
Pastor Paulo calls on the Congress to be true to the nation following calls of former President Rodrigo Duterte to open the book of accounts and the removal of Arroyo and Ungab as deputy speakers.
The Israel-Hamas war grinds on, and negotiations for a possible three-day ceasefire in the besieged enclave of Gaza is underway in exchange for hostages captured by Hamas.
Saudi Arabia will host two summits to tackle the ongoing war between Hamas and Israel.
In Brazil, a severe storm struck the state of São Paulo, leaving thousands of homes without power.
And Bank of America warns that U.S. debt will hit $50 trillion by 2033.
These and more for tonight's edition of Newsline World.
First in our news, Pastor Paulo calls on the members of the lower house to be truthful to the nation following the removal of Deputy Speakers Representative Gloria Macapagal Arroyo and Representative Isidro Ungab. This is allegedly due to their lack of support for House Resolution 1414, which calls for unity in support of House Speaker Martin Romualdez. In Immortal reports.
Representatives.
Pastor Apollo C. Kuble, through his program Spotlight, is calling on the members of the Congress to be truthful to the nation. This comes after the removal of former President and current Pampanga Representative Gloria Macapagal Arroyo and Davao City Representative Isidro Ungab from their Deputy Speaker positions in the House for not supporting House Resolution 1414, which calls for unity in support of Speaker Martin Romualdez. It's worth noting that recently, former President Rodrigo Duterte called for the opening of the House's Book of Accounts to show transparency in the institution's finances to the public. For Pastor Apollo, it is stated in the Constitution through freedom of information, so it is only right for the House to be truthful in their accounts.
Maraming mga opinions ang mga nagsilabasan. Pero at least itong dalawa ay nakapagbigay na ng kanilang positive statements na hindi naman daw sila mapait sa nangyari sa kanila, na inalis sila sa kanilang pagiging Deputy Speaker. At sa pagkaalam ko, so ang opinion, dahil dito nangyari lahat sa SMNI yung interview kay former President ating kaibigan Rodrigo Duterte at sa kanyang mga statements, both mga mga politiko yan eh. So, ang pagkakaalam ko lang, basta politiko ka, you should not be onion skin.
Yes.
Pag sinabi, tulad dito, most rotten institution, patutuhanan mo hindi rotten. No? So, ang inihingi lang naman ng ating former na Pangulo ay yung audit, which is also in the Constitution, na for the people to be informed, for the right of the people, for the freedom of information. Yun lang naman. So, mapatutuhan ng hindi talaga rotten and corrupt.
Pastor Apollo emphasized that referring to the House as a rotten institution has long been an issue in the country, and that it is good that this issue has been reopened to the public to show the legislators' intention to serve the nation and the Filipino people are genuine.
So, ngayon, ang tamang panahon, patutuhanan ninyo na hindi kayo rotten.
Amen.
Sa hinihingi. In fact, blessing in disguise yung ginawa ng Pangulong Duterte. No, hindi ka dapat maging defensive doon. Okay, hiningi ng ating former na Pangulo. Former Pangulo na ito eh. Ba't meron kayong courtesy sa kanya? Sige, pakita natin sa taong bayan. Para malaman ng taong bayan, dito natin ma-retrieve ang ating reputasyon bilang rotten institution. Di ba? Blessing in disguise yun.
According to Pastor Apollo, legislators should defend the institution, not themselves, by providing a clear audit of funds collected from the people's taxes.
You are putting yourselves together to defend yourselves. Do not defend yourselves. Defend the institution by giving us the knowledge of the audit.
Meanwhile, according to Pastor Paulo, House Resolution 1414 conveys a different message to the nation, and that the public's call for transparency in the House's book of accounts is not destabilizing or undermining the institution. The good pastor asserts that the true threat to the integrity of the lower house comes from radical groups. These groups are the ones advocating for the destabilization of the government.
Saan po ang destabilizing efforts doon? Walang destabilizing efforts. Hindi namin sinabing ibagsak ang gobyerno. Ang nag-destabilize ang inyong tatlong kasamahan dyan.
Yes.
Paano yung sinasabi? Ibagsak ang gobyerno. Ibagsak ang pamunuan. Sila'y nagpapabagsak. Kami hindi. Sinusuportahan pa namin lalo.
Yes.
Pero we have the right to know.
Yes.
According to the Constitution.
Amen.
So pag hiningan kayo ng audit to preserve the honor and integrity of the institution, show to the people yung audit. Yun ang hinihingi. Para wala, i-publish ninyo minsan. Pagka-publish, ganito, ganyan. Ganito namin ginagamit ang pera. Tapos ang istorya.
Recently, Representative Don Gonzales also resigned from the PDP Laban Party after naming former President Duterte as a threat to the integrity of the House. For God and my beloved Philippines, this has been Ina Mortel, SMNA News.
Negotiations are underway for a 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in return for the release of dozens of hostages currently being held by Hamas since October 7. This is from an AP report citing two officials, adding that the deal would enable more aid, including limited amounts of fuel, to enter Gaza. To recall, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stressed that there will be no ceasefire unless all hostages are freed. The devastating Gaza conflict has claimed 12,100 lives on both the Palestinian and Israeli sides, according to data released by health authorities on both sides on Wednesday. The latest data from the Gaza Strip's health department revealed a staggering death toll of 10,569 people since the outbreak of the current round of the conflict. In addition, the West Bank has reported 163 fatalities. Israeli sources reported that over 1,400 people lost their lives in the conflict. The Israeli Defense Force spokesperson confirmed on Wednesday the ongoing destruction of Hamas strongholds in Gaza City and the seizure of around 700 rockets projectiles. And additionally, the Engineer Corps have successfully demolished 130 Hamas-used underground tunnel shafts. To facilitate civilian evacuation, the Israeli military announced that the Salah al-Din Road was designated as an evacuation corridor on Wednesday, opening from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Around 50,000 individuals exited the embattled zone via this route for southern Gaza during that time of period, 3 times the number of the previous day. Hamas continued their clashes with the Israeli forces, claiming to have destroyed 15 Israeli military vehicles, including 5 tanks across multiple locations in Gaza. The El Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, claimed responsibility for destroying 136 Israeli military vehicles since the current conflict began.
Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates will be setting up a field hospital in Gaza Strip in collaboration with Israel's defense forces. Rataru Omori reports.
6 cargo planes carrying necessary equipment and medical supplies to set up a field hospital departed from the UAE to Gaza earlier this week.
The President of the UAE, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, ordered the deployment of cargo planes to provide medical assistance to the Palestinians. The fully equipped hospital would have a capacity of 150 beds and include several departments and other essential medical services to treat both children and adults. The initiative is just the first part of the UAE's latest humanitarian campaign for Gaza, known as the Gallant Night 3. The wealthy nation situated in the Persian Gulf has previously pledged $20 million in aid to the Palestinian people and offered to bring about 1,000 Palestinian children along with their families to the UAE for medical treatment. The UAE's trade minister said that the conflict will not affect the bilateral trade with Israel. The Gulf nation has openly condemned Israel's war on Gaza and called for an immediate ceasefire to protect civilians.
The UAE's latest initiative is on top of the Compassion for Gaza campaign, which started last month. The Palestinian death toll in the war-torn enclave has exceeded 10,000 according to its Ministry of Health. Reporting from Dubai, this has been Gratero Omori, SMNA News, United Arab Emirates.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia will host 2 summits of Arab and Islamic nations this week to discuss the Israel-Hamas conflict. Melchizedek Cadiz for the details.
Assalamu alaikum. The 5th Arab-African Summit set to take place in the Saudi capital of Riyadh has been postponed this weekend to give way for the emergency meetings of Arab and Islamic nations. The Arab League will be joined by representatives from the 22 Arab states and will take place on Friday. Meanwhile, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation or OIC conference will be held on Saturday to discuss Israel's military escalation and the situation in Gaza. The OIC, which calls itself the collective voice of the Muslim world, boasts of 57 member states spread over 4 continents and is the second largest organization after the United Nations. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi will travel to Saudi Arabia to join the OIC conference this Saturday, November 11. It would be the first time Raisi will visit the Gulf Kingdom since the 2 countries agreed to restore relations after 7 years of diplomatic spate. It can be remembered that Saudi Arabia and Iran restored diplomatic ties in March in a deal brokered by China. The country's investment minister said that the purpose of the summits and other gatherings under the leadership of Saudi Arabia would be to achieve a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Barakallahu fikum jami'an, kan hada Melchizedek Cadiz, Akhbar SMNI, Kuwait.
In a joint operation, Brazil's federal police arrested individuals suspected of having ties with Hezbollah. The arrests made in São Paulo aimed toward planned attacks on buildings associated with Jewish community in Brazil. David Leader has the details live. David?
Mayk, the Federal Police of Brazil arrested 2 Brazilians this last Wednesday in an operation that aims to frustrate attempts of terrorism attacks in the recruitment of Brazilians for terrorism acts in the country.
Brazilian authorities suspected that the Hezbollah was planning to launch terrorist attacks in Brazilian soil against buildings linked to the Jewish community. The 2 men were arrested in São Paulo after the federal police issued 11 warrants of search and arrest in São Paulo, Minas Gerais, and in the Federal District. One of them was arrested at the airport after his trip to Lebanon to gather information for the group to conduct terrorist attacks in Brazil, as said by the police. This was a joint task force between Brazilian and international intelligence authorities. In acts formerly known as Twitter, of the Office of the Prime Minister of Israel stated that the Brazilian security services, together with the Mossad and its partners in the Israeli security community, alongside additional international security agencies, foiled a terrorist attacks in Brazil, planned by the Hezbollah terrorist organization, directed and financed by Iran.
Mikey, the investigation is still ongoing, and if the suspects are convicted, they can be sentenced up to 15 years in prison, according to the Brazilian law against terrorism. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. That's David Lira from SMNI Studios.
The number of Thai nationals taken captive by Hamas has increased as government efforts continue to secure their release. Chat Mongon Pisamagazan has the news.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has confirmed that another Thai worker has been taken hostage by Hamas, raising the total of citizens captured by the Palestinian militant group to 25. The Thai worker was captured during the first day of hostilities, but the ministry was able to confirm the number just recently. The bodies of another 8 workers killed in Hamas raids arrived in the country on Thursday afternoon. The Foreign Affairs Ministry said the Thai workers held hostage by Hamas are expected to be part of the first ones who will be released. Thailand's Prime Minister Sethar Thavisin previously said the government held talks with the Foreign Minister of Iran and Hamas to secure the freedom of its 23 hostages held in Gaza. The Thai government recently donated around 3 million baht to the United Nations allotted for Palestinian refugees. As of Wednesday, November 8, the number of Thai workers who died from the Israel-Gaza war stood at 34 and 19 others have been injured. รายงานจากกรุงเทพมหานคร นายชัดมงคลพิสมัยโกศล SMS News ประเทศไทย สวัสดีครับ
Filipinos are set to return to the country after they successfully crossed the Rafah crossing in Egypt from Gaza. According to the Department of Foreign Affairs, the repatriates along with Palestinians are expected to arrive in the country on Friday. Sigrid Castaneda tells us more.
The Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA, has confirmed that the repatriates will be on Qatar Airways flight QR932, scheduled to land at Naiya Terminal 3 on Wednesday afternoon. 35 Filipinos and 1 Palestinian are among those set to arrive in the country. Undersecretary Eduardo Jose de Vega stated that a total of 36 individuals are expected on Friday. Among them, 40 Filipinos have crossed the Rafah border, with 3 choosing to stay in Egypt with their Egyptian spouses. 2 are a Filipino, mother and her daughter, with the mother being 38 weeks pregnant and unable to travel, and both hold Philippine passports. Meanwhile, the 3rd batch of Filipinos from Lebanon arrived in the Philippines on Wednesday night. They were 9 OFWs who boarded Qatar Airways flight QR928 and landed at Naiya Terminal 3. They decided to return because of the heightened tensions between Israel and the Hezbollah group in Lebanon. Also, 2 OFWs returned from the West Bank amid the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian group Hamas. They represent the first batch from the West Bank. Philippine Ambassador to Jordan Wilfredo C. Santos announced preparations for the safety of Filipinos among ongoing violence in the West Bank. The Embassy of Jordan reported a total of 123 Filipinos in the West Bank, including 91 resident Filipinos married to Palestinian nationals, their children and grandchildren, and 9 nuns of different religions, along with 23 OFWs. The returning OFWs from the West Bank received financial assistance of $700 each, equivalent to over 39,000 pesos. As of November 9, 2023, a total of 19 OFWs returned from Lebanon, while 184 OFWs and 7 infants returned from Israel. 2 OFWs also returned from the West Bank. For God and my beloved Philippines, this has been Sigrid Castaneda, Azamanay News.
Japan and Ukraine agreed to host a joint conference in Tokyo in February of next year to discuss reconstruction efforts in the Eastern European country, Ria Saito reports.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky agreed to strengthen their cooperation in rebuilding Ukraine during a recent phone call between the 2 leaders. Kishida and Zelensky held phone talks on the sidelines of the Group of 7 summit held in Tokyo from November 7 to 8. Kishida assured that Japan will maintain its support for Ukraine, while Zelensky expressed gratitude for Japan's efforts to assist his country. Leaders from the 7 wealthy nations, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States, as well as the European Union, discussed the Israel-Gaza crisis and Russia's war with Ukraine during the 2-day gathering of foreign ministers. During the summit, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa said that ongoing conflict in the Middle East will not affect its support for Ukraine and vowed to continue sanctions against Russia. The top diplomats called for humanitarian pauses in Gaza and recognized Israel's right to self-defense in accordance with international law. Japan has announced $65 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza during a state visit to the Middle East last week. The government has also provided a total of $7.6 billion in aid to Ukraine since the war with Russia broke out. Ijo, Nihon Karasai Torianis Tatsudaishimashita, S9 Japan.
A possible meeting on the sidelines of the APEC summit is in the works between Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Alyssa Torres tells us more.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Chinese President Xi Jinping may engage in talks on November 16 in San Francisco during the Asia-Pacific Leaders Meeting. Japanese top National Security Advisor Takeo Akiba is expected to lay the groundwork for the summit during his discussions with senior Chinese officials in Beijing. If this summit proceeds, it will mark the first discussion between the two leaders since November of last year in Thailand. Kishida's government aims to sustain high-level communication with China following strained relations due to various issues, including Japan's release of treated nuclear wastewater coming from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the ocean, a move strongly opposed by China. China also implemented an import ban on all seafoods from Japan in response. There is also a territorial dispute between China and Japan over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, known as the Yaoyu Islands in China. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden and Xi may also discuss and hold bilateral talks next Wednesday in a West Coast city in the United States. Reporting, this has been Alyssa Torres, SMNI News.
Angry residents in São Paulo resorted to protests as thousands remain without power for days after a strong storm hit Brazil's largest city last week. Natalia Prado reports live. Natalia?
Yes, Fred. Days of having no access to electricity push a dissatisfied residents in São Paulo and the metropolitan region to protest as a massive power outage has caused a significant inconvenience in their daily lives. As of Tuesday, around 30,200 properties in metropolitan region of São Paulo are still without electricity as the massive power outage entered its fifth day. Angry residents gather in the streets to show their dissatisfaction with the delayed service, while several businesses had enough of facing another day working in the dark. Protesters were seen setting tires on fire and blocking traffic on one of the main avenues in the southern part of São Paulo. The massive power outage started on Friday of last week after a strong storm hit the city, knocking out power lines as well as destroying homes and facilities. According to an utility company, the blackout affected 2.1 million customers in 24 cities in the metropolitan region and at least 4.2 million households across São Paulo state. Fred, the delay in restoring electricity led to a lot of criticism and calls for investigation against the privatized Anel utility company that is serving around 67 million Brazilians. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you. That's Natalia Prado live from SMNI Studios.
Meanwhile, the series of joint training exercises called Kamandag 7 or Cooperation of Warriors at Sea between the Philippines and the United States is set to commence next week. Paul Montibon has the details.
For the first time ever, Japan and the Republic of Korea will join the 7th series of Kamandag 7 joint military exercises while serving as an observers or representatives from the United Kingdom under the leadership of Philippine Marines and the U.S. Marine Corps. The annual training exercise will run from November 9 to November 20 and will be conducted in Luzon, including Batanes, Zamboanga, Tawi-Tawi, Palawan, Cavite, and the National Capital Region. According to the data from the Philippine Marines, nearly 3,000 personnel will participate in the 2-week trainings, with the majority from the Philippines, followed by the United States, Korea, Japan, and the United Kingdom.
For the Philippine Navy, it is imperative that our forces actively participate in such training endeavors to upgrade and develop our capabilities toward fully realizing our vision to become a modern and multi-capable naval force. By actively engaging in military-to-military training, we also reaffirm our commitment to achieving the highest levels of proficiency and operational readiness of our forces so we can contribute significantly to our maritime nation's overall defense posture.
On the other hand, the Philippines emphasized the significance of such activities for the advancement of the country, especially in facing security challenges.
Together, we send a powerful message to the world, especially to those who may seek to disrupt the peace, that our partnership is unbreakable. Our resolve, unyielding, and our commitment to defending our nations is always unwavering.
Kamandag is a bilateral exercise between the Philippines and the United States under the Mutual Defense Board and Security Engagement Board activities. It aims to further strengthen interoperability among various armed forces from different countries, including special operations, coastal defense capability, and humanitarian assistance and disaster response.
Let us all send a message to the world that we, like-minded nations who respect international law and a rules-based international order, come together to collaborate, cooperate, and train to protect common interests.
For God and my beloved Philippines, reporting Paulo SMNI News.
In the meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin engages in meeting with a senior Chinese military officer in Moscow. Jane Cognita has the details.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Zhang Yusha, Vice Chairman of the China Central Military Commission or CMC in Moscow. The two met on Wednesday with both sides pledging to strengthen the pragmatic cooperation between the two militaries. During their meeting, Putin requested to convey his greetings to Chinese President Xi Jinping. According to Putin, the friendship between Russia and China is crucial for maintaining peace and stability in the region, which is completely different from the kind of alliance during the Cold War. The Russian president also praised the rapid progress in their bilateral economic and trade ties over the past years, expressing that the two countries maintain a close relationship on international platforms such as the United Nations, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and BRICS. In his response, Zhang expressed gratitude to Putin and conveyed Putin's greetings to Chinese President Xi Jinping, and that the relationship between the two countries has strengthened over time. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu conducted a welcome ceremony for Zhang earlier on Wednesday, followed by an official discussion. Reporting, this has been Jane Cognita, SMNI News.
Moving on, Australian Federal Police sent at least 100 police officers to the Solomon Islands to enhance security for the 2023 Pacific Games, which starts next week. Sasha Haza has the news.
Dozens more Australian police officers arrived in the Solomon Islands on Wednesday as preparations continue for the much-awaited regional sports event set to boost friendship and brotherhood among countries in the Pacific region. The Royal Solomon Islands Police Force, or RSIPF, will lead the security operation for the Pacific Games in partnership with Australian Federal Police, or AFP. The 100 additional personnel sent from Australia will join AFP members already assigned in the Solomon Islands. The Pacific Games will run from the 19th of November to the 2nd of December 2023, with athletes from 24 countries and territories, including Australia and New Zealand, expected to join the event. Australia will be sending 75 athletes to compete in the Continental Multisport event held every 4 years. The tickets, which cost between $30 to $200 Solomon Islands dollars each, are now available for purchase. Prime Minister Manasseh Sugaware was the first to purchase tickets and urged the islanders to support the event. This is the first time that the Solomon Islands will host a continental event. Members of the Australian Federal Police will extend their presence in the Solomon Islands until June 2024 to assist with the general elections. Reporting from Sydney, this has been Sasha Hassa, SMNI News, Australia.
Bank of America predicts U.S. national debt to hit $50 trillion by 2033, driven by a $20 trillion surge in the next decade. The current U.S. debt sits at $33.6 trillion, and it could hit $54 trillion by 2033 due to excessive spending. Federal deficit is spiked by $320 billion to $1.7 trillion in 2023, forcing the U.S. Treasury Department to auction trillions of dollars of fresh bonds. Rising bond yields strain budgets, widening deficits. The bank warns the debt now surpasses the combined gross domestic products of China, Japan, Germany, and India. Bank of America also warned that as long as U.S. policymakers continue to borrow heavily and add to the outstanding debt of the government, investors are poised to worry about the lingering risks of inflation, bond defaults, and currency debasement. Despite concerns, borrowing is likely to continue for economic growth. The U.S. broke the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling in 2023. To recall, on June 3, U.S. President Joe Biden signed a debt ceiling bill that lifted the debt limit until 2025.
Meanwhile, the former Prime Minister of Cambodia called on the United Nations and parties concerned to seek negotiation for a ceasefire in Gaza. Anita de Guzman has the details.
Former Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, the longest-serving leader in the country's history, urged Hamas to release its hostages and reminded Israel to keep its promise of not bombing civilians in Gaza. Hun Sen, who now serves as president of the Supreme Privy Council to the king, called for an end to the violence through social media. The so-called Cambodia's strongman warned that the Gaza Strip will become the world's largest massacre site without a ceasefire. Hun Sen led Cambodia for more than 38 years, which made him the longest-serving leader in the country's modern history. Cambodia has condemned all acts of terrorism and violence against innocent civilians and relayed its condolences to the families who lost their loved ones in the ongoing war. While Cambodia condemned the violence and the loss of thousands of innocent lives, the country remains neutral in the ongoing conflict. Di siya Nanisa de Guzman, Drangan Chakuntep Mahanakon, SMN News, Pratetay, Sawadika.
Meanwhile, Pastor Paulo commends the principled approach to life exhibited by former President Rodrigo Duterte, specifically highlighting the emphasis on honesty in public service. MJ Moldahar reports.
In government, the #1 criterion for public service is fiscal honesty. You best be honest with money.
During the Spotlight program, Pastor Paulo of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ expressed his support to former President Rodrigo Duterte's principles in governance and highlighted the importance of fiscal honesty as the top criterion in government. Pastor Paulo's words comes following the recent remarks by Duterte in his Gikan sa Masa para sa Masa program aired on Monday, as well as a recent Facebook post from Duterte's page. According to Pastor Paulo, in public service, principles are closely related to money and how those in power manage the nation's funds. Recent discussions about opening the House of Representatives' Book of Accounts align with former President Duterte's call for transparency, calling it as one of the most rotten institutions in the government.
Pagka-prinsipyo yung pinag-uusapan sa public service, prinsipyo sa pera. What is your attitude towards money? Because public trust is public service. Public service is public trust. How can I trust you when there is no money? No money involved, walang public trust dyan. It's just you. Pero when they say public trust is public service, money involved yan. Pag wala kang prinsipyo sa pera, madali kang bumagsak sa pera, tumiklop sa pera, wala kang prinsipyo. Hindi tayo magkakasundo. Tama yung sinabi ng ating Pangulo. We are the same in that instant there. Public service, pera yan eh. Lalo na kayo nasa dyan sa House of Representatives, kayo yung naghihimay-himay sa budget, kayo naglalagay dito, lagay doon, lagay dyan, lagay doon. Oh. So, ang hinihingi lang ng tao, kasi mandated kayong gawin yan, yung transparency. Yun lang. Napaka-simple. Wala nang iba pang mga patutsadang sagot dito, sagot doon. Nako.
Stick to the issue.
Stick to the issue. Yan lang.
The good pastor also emphasized that when talking about principles in public service, the central topic is money, and being transparent, especially when it involves public funds, is crucial.
Ako, pag perang pinag-uusapan, wala kang prinsipyo dyan, madali tayong magkahiwalay. Pero pagka pinagkatiwala ang pera sa ating kamay, dapat transparent tayo kung paano natin ginagamit yan. Kung saan natin ginagamit. How do we use it? Paano natin ginamit? Saan natin ginamit? Kaninong pangalan, nakapangalan? Pag-organisasyon, dapat walang ipangalan kanino mang pangalan, kundi sa organisasyon iyong kinapapalooban. Walang magnanakaw nang hindi ayon sa mga nilagdaan natin. Walang designated money na pupunta sa bulsa ng iba. Kundi kung saan yan nakapukol, doon dapat ilagay yan.
The good pastor also cited Lee Kuan Yew, the former Prime Minister of Singapore, as an example of a leader who selected honest individuals to be part of his government, contributing to the development of Singapore.
Kaya si Lee Kuan Yew, I admire him. When he was building Singapore into becoming a Singapore like we do now, at the beginning when they were made an orphan because they were not accepted in the Federal Federation of Malaysia, pumili siya ng leader. Ang kanyang number one criterion of leadership is hindi yung matalino ka. You must be super honest. Super honest with money. Kaya, ginader niya yung mga taong super honest. That is how Singapore rose up. The kingdom will not rise up like this if those that are around me are super magnanakaw. Only the super honest will stay with me.
Amen.
It can be noted that until now, the call of former President Duterte to open the Book of Accounts of the House of Representatives and make it public has not been responded to, and instead, the House issued a resolution calling for unity among its members to resist those who say they are seeking to destroy the institution. For Ganamabul of Philippines, I'm Jem Mondihar, SMNI News.
And before we end, may you be inspired with the message of the appointed Son of God. Hate leads us to destruction. Love leads us to the unity of the invisible God.
And for our Christmas countdown is 45 days to go before Christmas. And that's all for today's edition of Newsline World. For more news update, you may visit smnichannel.com or follow us in our official social media accounts on Rumble, Facebook, and Twitter. For God and Country, I'm Frederico Velloso.
For God and Country, I'm Mayk Oliveira. Thank you very much for watching Newsline World, and thank you to our beloved Pastor Paulo for the great opportunity to be part of this program.
May you continue to listen on SMNI as delivers nothing but fair, truthful, and balanced news, because SMNI is your source of credible news.